The alarm tore through the tunnels of Haven City before Daniel Hart even opened his eyes. It was not the soft chime that woke the workers each morning. It was the deep, grinding wail that had not sounded in his entire lifetime, a sound built into the walls of the old bunker city for one purpose only: to warn that something from the surface had triggered the ancient defense grid. Daniel rolled out of his bunk and was on his feet before his mind had finished catching up with his body. Around him, other officers were doing the same, pulling on boots, grabbing headsets, moving fast through corridors carved into solid rock centuries ago. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Every person in Haven City had been trained since childhood to treat that sound as the most serious thing they would ever hear. He reached the control chamber in under 3 minutes. Grace Miller was already there, her hands moving across a bank of old but carefully maintained screens, her eyes locked on a pulse of light blinking somewhere above the Atlantic coastline. "Report," Daniel said, breathless. "The outer markers just went active," Grace said. "All of them. Every quarantine beacon we placed around the planet after the collapse. They have been silent for 200 years, Daniel. Now they are broadcasting again." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. The quarantine beacons were not simple alarms. They were built by the founders of Haven City for a single reason: to warn the hidden cities of humanity if anything from beyond Earth ever came close enough to notice them. For 2 centuries, nothing ever had. The galaxy had forgotten Earth existed. That was the entire point of going quiet, after the old wars nearly wiped humanity from existence. "Could it be a malfunction?" Daniel asked, already knowing the answer would be no. Grace shook her head. "I checked 3 times. The beacons are reading an object entering the outer edge of the solar system. It is moving with intention. It is not a rock. It is not debris. Something built it, and whatever it is heading straight for us." Nathan Cole, the aging commander of Haven City, stepped into the chamber with the calm of a man who had spent his whole life preparing for a day he hoped would never come. His gray eyes moved over the screens, then settled on Daniel and Grace. "Wake the council," Nathan said quietly. "Tell them the silence is over." Far above the tunnels of Haven City, in the thin light of the upper atmosphere, none of the old surface ruins stirred. The cities that had once covered the earth were long gone, swallowed by forest and dust, left as empty monuments to a civilization that had chosen to vanish rather than be destroyed. 200 years earlier, after a war that had almost ended humanity completely, the survivors made a single choice that shaped everything that followed. They went underground. They erased every visible trace of themselves from orbit. They built quarantine beacons to warn them if anyone from the stars ever came close. And then they waited, generation after generation, hidden and quiet, hoping the galaxy would simply forget they had ever existed. For 200 years, it worked. Far beyond the edge of the solar system, in the crowded star systems of the Veldran Compact, that same forgetting had become something else entirely. It had become legend. Children across 100 worlds were taught the story of the vanished species called humans, though few believed it was ever fully true. Some said humans destroyed themselves through endless conflict. Some said they were wiped out trying to reach the stars too quickly, without wisdom to guide their power. Others said they never existed as anything more than a cautionary tale, invented to teach young civilizations not to grow reckless with new technology. The Veldran Compact, the greatest alliance of star nations in known space, built entire philosophies around the supposed failure of humanity, using it as proof that unity and caution were always better than ambition and pride. Nobody in the Compact worried about humans anymore. Nobody searched for Earth. It had been marked, centuries earlier, as an empty, quarantined world, unimportant and forgotten. One of 1,000 dead systems on old star charts nobody bothered updating. That comfort was about to end, though not because of Earth. It ended because of something far older and far more dangerous than any myth. Deep in the unmapped darkness beyond compact space, in a region of the galaxy few explorers ever returned from, something had been sleeping for centuries. It had a name whispered only in the oldest historical archives of a dozen long-dead empires, a name the Compact itself had almost erased from memory, because remembering it was too painful. The Scarrow Swarm. Long before the Veldran Compact rose to power, before 100 peaceful star nations formed their alliance, the Scarrow had nearly ended galactic civilization entirely. They were not a single species in the way most understood the word. They were a hive, a parasitic collective that spread from world to world, consuming resources, consuming populations, consuming anything that could be turned into more of itself. Entire empires that once ruled vast regions of space were reduced to ash and silence within a single generation of the Scarrow's arrival. It took the combined strength of every surviving civilization at that time, fighting together at tremendous cost, to finally drive the swarm back into the dark, unexplored edges of the galaxy. After the war, the survivors did what survivors often do. They tried to forget. They rebuilt. They formed the Veldran Compact from the ashes of that terrible alliance, promising each other it would prevent such devastation from ever happening again. They grew comfortable. They grew proud. They stopped watching the dark corners of the galaxy where the swarm had disappeared, convincing themselves the enemy was extinct, destroyed, gone forever. They were wrong. In the silent, lightless void beyond every star chart the Compact still trusted, something had been growing again, patiently, quietly, for longer than any living being could remember. It had not been destroyed at all. It had only been waiting, gathering strength in the dark, biding its time until the galaxy around it grew comfortable enough to be caught unprepared once more. That time had finally come. Back on Earth, inside the deep stone chamber that served as Haven City's council hall, 12 men and women sat around an ancient circular table that had been passed down since the founding of the hidden cities. Daniel and Grace stood near the entrance, watching as Nathan Cole explained what the beacons had detected. "An object entered our system 4 hours ago," Nathan said. "It is moving slower than expected, likely damaged or cautious. It does not appear to be a warship. Our long-range instruments suggest it may be some kind of scout vessel, alone, possibly fleeing something rather than searching for something." One of the council members, an older woman named Helen Ashcroft, folded her hands tightly. "Fleeing from what?" "We do not know yet," Nathan admitted. "But whatever it is close enough now that it may notice the beacon signals we accidentally triggered when our own systems detected it. If it is capable of tracing that signal back to Earth, our silence, the very thing that has protected us for 2 centuries, may already be broken." The room fell quiet. Every person there understood what was at stake. Haven City was not the only hidden human settlement, but it was the oldest and largest, home to nearly 500,000 people who had built an entire underground civilization based on one simple principle: survival through invisibility. If that invisibility failed now, after 200 years of careful discipline, there would be no way to undo it. Grace stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "If it truly is a scout ship running from something dangerous, that changes things. It means whatever pushed it this close to a dead system it should have ignored might be dangerous enough that hiding from it will no longer be enough. We built this quarantine to be forgotten by the galaxy. We never built a plan for what happens if the galaxy itself is in trouble." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then perhaps it is time we consider one." Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a mixture of fear and something else, something he had never expected to feel in his lifetime. For as long as he could remember, the stars above Earth were something to avoid, something to hide from, something that represented only danger and loss. He had grown up hearing stories of the old wars that forced humanity underground, learning from childhood that safety meant staying hidden and small. But now, for the first time in 2 centuries, the silence had cracked open, and whatever was coming, it was coming whether Haven City was ready or not. Outside, far above the buried tunnels and quiet stone corridors of the last human cities, a single damaged vessel drifted closer to the edge of the solar system, its systems failing, its crew exhausted, carrying with it a warning the galaxy above was not prepared to hear. Something had woken up in the dark, and it was no longer sleeping. Kalen Voss had commanded warships for 30 years, and in all that time, he had never seen an enemy erase an entire fleet in under 6 minutes. Yet that was exactly what happened above the mining colony of Doran Reach, and he watched it happen from the bridge of his own vessel, powerless to stop it. The compact fleet had been sent to investigate strange signal losses near the outer rim, a routine patrol mission that should have ended with a simple report about faulty communication relays. Instead, 23 warships arrived at Doran Reach to find the colony already gone. Not destroyed in the way war usually destroyed things, but consumed, stripped of every structure, every resource, every living creature, as if some enormous mouth had swallowed the entire settlement and left only bare rock behind. Then the swarm arrived to finish what it had started. Kalen had never imagined anything could move the way the Scarrow ships moved, not flying so much as pouring through space. Clusters of jagged biological vessels fused together into shapes that made no logical engineering sense yet functioned with terrifying precision. They did not fire conventional weapons. They released clouds of smaller organisms that swarmed over compact hulls, breaking through armor plating that had never failed before, forcing crews to either flee or be lost entirely. All ships, retreat, Kalen ordered, his voice tighter than he wanted it to be. Full withdrawal, now. Of the 23 ships that arrived at Doran Reach, only 9 made it back to compact space. The news spread through the Veldran compact faster than any official report could contain it. Within days, similar attacks were reported across a dozen border systems, all following the same pattern. Colonies vanished. Fleets sent to investigate were destroyed or barely escaped. The enemy did not send messages, did not offer warnings, did not seem interested in negotiation of any kind. It simply moved forward, world by world, consuming everything in its path. Panic began to spread through compact space, in a way the Alliance had not experienced in generations. Political leaders who had spent decades debating budget allocations and trade agreements suddenly found themselves facing something none of their careful diplomacy could solve. Emergency councils were called, military reserves were activated, yet every strategy session ended the same way, with military officers admitting they had no effective answer to an enemy that could break through their strongest defenses in minutes. It was Lyra Son, a quiet historian working in the deep archives of Veldris Prime, who first suggested looking backward instead of forward. Lyra had spent most of her career studying the earliest records of the Compact's founding, long before most of her colleagues considered that period worth serious attention. She believed history held answers, even when the present refused to provide them, and when news of the Scarrow's return reached the capital, she remembered something buried deep in the oldest archives, references to a previous war against this exact enemy, fought centuries earlier by an alliance of civilizations that no longer existed in the same form. She requested access to the deepest vaults of the Compact archive, records so old that most scholars assumed they contained nothing but outdated myths and exaggerated stories. Her request was denied twice before an emergency council member, desperate for any possible advantage, finally approved it. What she found changed everything. Buried among fragments of pre-compact history were detailed accounts of the original war against the Scarrow swarm, fought by an alliance of a dozen civilizations working together at devastating cost. Most of the records focused on the larger alliance as a whole, but scattered throughout were repeated mentions of a single species that fought with a level of aggression and adaptability the historical accounts described as almost frightening even to their own allies. Humans. Lyra had grown up hearing the same myths everyone else in the Compact had heard, stories of a species too reckless to survive, too violent to be trusted, ultimately destroyed by its own nature. But these records told a different story entirely. According to the oldest surviving accounts, humans were not the weakest member of that ancient alliance. They were often the ones sent into the most dangerous engagements, precisely because no other species could match their willingness to adapt quickly under extreme pressure. Several passages credited human tactical decisions with turning multiple key battles during the original war, though later Compact historians had either overlooked these details or deliberately minimized them when the mythology of a doomed, destroyed species became more politically convenient to teach. Lyra brought her findings directly to the Emergency Council, requesting immediate audience despite her low political standing. She stood before senior Compact leaders, many of whom had never heard her name before that day, and laid out everything she had discovered. "These records suggest humans were never truly destroyed," Lyra said. "They may have simply withdrawn from galactic contact after the original war ended, likely due to catastrophic losses. If any of their descendants survived, and if the coordinates recorded in these old archives are still accurate, there may be a chance we are not facing this enemy without any prior experience against it." A senior council member named Oren Feld, a man known throughout the Compact for his skepticism toward anything unproven, folded his arms. You are asking us to base a wartime strategy on the possibility that an extinct species may not actually be extinct, based on documents older than most of our star systems. I am asking you to consider every possible advantage, Lyra replied evenly, when the alternative is watching our worlds disappear one by one, while we debate whether old records deserve our attention. Kalen Voss, present in the council chamber after his forced retreat from Doran Reach, found himself unexpectedly agreeing with her. He had seen firsthand what the Compact's current strength could and could not accomplish against this enemy. If there was any chance, however small, that another civilization had once fought the Scarrow successfully and survived, it was worth investigating. I request permission to lead a scouting mission to the coordinates in these records, Kalen said. If nothing is there, we lose very little. If something is there, we may gain an ally that already understands this enemy in ways we do not. The council debated for hours. Some argued the mission was a waste of resources during a crisis that demanded immediate defensive action. Others pointed out that current defensive efforts were already failing catastrophically, and any potential advantage was worth pursuing. Eventually, worn down by the growing casualty reports arriving every hour from the border systems, the council approved the mission with limited resources and a strict timeline. Kalen was given a single ship, a small crew, and very little time. As preparations began, Lyra insisted on joining the expedition herself, arguing that her knowledge of the ancient records made her essential to interpreting whatever they might find. Kalen initially resisted, worried about bringing a civilian scholar into what could easily become a dangerous encounter, but Lyra remained firm. If we find them, she said, you will need someone who understands the history between us and them better than a soldier can. Whatever they became after 200 years of silence, they deserve to be approached with more than just weapons pointed in their direction. Kalen eventually agreed. 3 days later, their small vessel departed Veldris Prime, carrying a skeleton crew, aging star charts recovered from the deepest archive vaults, and the desperate hope of an entire alliance that was losing a war it did not know how to win. Behind them, the Scarrow continued its advance, consuming 3 more colonies in the time it took Kalen's ship to leave compact space entirely. Reports flooded in from every direction, each one more devastating than the last. Entire fleets were being lost, trying to defend systems the swarm seemed to target with terrifying efficiency, as though it understood exactly where compact defenses were weakest. Inside the council chambers back on Veldris Prime, Oren Feld watched the casualty reports scroll across his display with growing dread. He had spent his career believing careful diplomacy and measured strength were enough to guarantee peace and stability. For the first time, he found himself hoping that a mythology he had spent years dismissing might somehow turn out to be true. Aboard the small scouting vessel racing toward the edge of known space, Kalen stood on the bridge beside Lyra, staring at the old coordinates displayed on their navigation console. The numbers pointed toward a quiet, unremarkable system that compact records had long ago marked as empty and irrelevant, a dead world orbiting an unremarkable star, forgotten by nearly everyone in the galaxy. If they are still there, Kalen said quietly, after 200 years of silence, what do you think we will find? Lyra studied the old records one more time, tracing her fingers over faded text, describing a species the galaxy had chosen to forget. I think, she said slowly, we may be about to discover that the greatest mistake this alliance ever made was assuming silence always means someone is gone. The ship continued forward, carrying 2 representatives of a galaxy in crisis, toward a world that had spent 2 centuries perfecting the art of disappearing completely. Neither of them yet understood just how wrong every assumption about that world truly was. The quarantine beacon nearest the edge of the solar system caught the scouting vessel the moment it crossed into detection range, and within seconds, every screen in Haven City's control chamber lit up with new data. Daniel Hart had barely slept since the first alarm 3 days earlier, and now, standing beside Grace Miller as the readings updated in real time, he felt his exhaustion vanish completely. It changed course, Grace said, watching the small vessel's trajectory shift on the display. It is not passing through the system anymore. It is heading directly toward Earth. Nathan Cole arrived moments later, his expression grim but composed. Confirm the ship's origin if you can. I want to know exactly what we are dealing with, before it gets any closer. Grace worked quickly, cross-referencing the vessel's design against the limited records Haven City still possessed from before the collapse. Old catalogs of alien ship designs collected during the final years of contact with the wider galaxy. After several tense minutes, she found a partial match. The hull design resembles vessels associated with an alliance called the Veldran Compact, Grace said. Our records on them are old and incomplete, but they appear to be one of the dominant powers in known space, formed sometime after our ancestors went into hiding. Nathan's jaw tightened. And they are coming here. It appears so, Grace confirmed. The ship is small, likely a scouting vessel rather than anything built for combat. Whatever they are looking for, they do not seem to be arriving with hostile intent, at least not based on their approach pattern. Daniel stepped closer to the display, watching the small blinking light continue its steady approach toward Earth. 200 years of careful silence, generations of discipline built entirely around staying hidden, and now a single ship was flying directly toward the one place in the galaxy their ancestors had worked so hard to erase from every record. "What do we do?" Daniel asked. Nathan was quiet for a long moment before answering. "We have spent 2 centuries preparing defenses in case anyone ever found us. We built those defenses assuming discovery would mean danger. But Grace is right. This ship does not appear to be attacking. Before we decide anything, I want to understand why they are here." The council convened within the hour, and the debate that followed lasted long into the night. Some members argued for immediate defensive action, insisting that any outside contact represented an unacceptable risk to everything Haven City had built. Others, including Grace, argued that hiding forever was never a realistic long-term plan, and that this unexpected contact might be the first real opportunity to understand what had happened in the galaxy during their 200 years of silence. In the end, Nathan made the final decision. Haven City would not attack the approaching vessel. Instead, a small team would meet it under careful, controlled conditions, with full defensive systems ready to respond if necessary, but with the initial approach handled through communication rather than immediate confrontation. Daniel volunteered to be part of that team. So did Grace. 3 days later, the alien scouting vessel entered Earth's atmosphere, guided by careful instructions transmitted from Haven City's communication systems, instructions crafted using linguistic patterns their ancestors had recorded from old galactic contact centuries earlier. The ship descended slowly over a remote stretch of forest above one of Haven City's hidden surface entrances, landing gently in a wide clearing that had been secretly prepared for exactly this kind of encounter. Daniel stood at the edge of that clearing with Grace beside him, along with 4 other officers positioned carefully out of immediate sight, weapons ready but hidden, watching as the strange vessel's outer hatch slowly opened. 2 figures emerged. Kalen Voss stepped out first, moving cautiously, his unfamiliar alien features immediately marking him as something entirely outside human experience, tall and angular, with skin that shifted subtly between shades of deep blue and gray depending on the light. Behind him came Lyra Sun, smaller and more delicate in build, her wide eyes scanning the surrounding forest with obvious fascination rather than fear. For a long, silent moment, neither side moved. Then Lyra raised both hands slowly, palms open, a gesture Daniel recognized instinctively as a sign of peaceful intent, one that apparently translated across species without much difficulty. Grace stepped forward first, mirroring the gesture, her heart pounding as she became, in that instant, the first human in 200 years to make direct contact with a being from beyond Earth. "We mean no harm," Lyra said, her translator device converting her words into clear, understandable speech. "We came searching for records of a species called humans. We did not expect to find you still here, still alive." Grace kept her hands raised, her voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "We have been here the entire time. We simply chose not to be found." Kalen studied both humans carefully, his expression difficult to read. "For 2 centuries, the galaxy has believed your species no longer existed. Our own records described you as extinct, a myth taught to remind civilizations of the dangers of unchecked ambition." "We are aware of what the galaxy believes," Grace replied. "It was safer that way." Daniel finally stepped forward as well, standing beside Grace. "Why are you here now?" After 200 years of nobody looking for us, why did that suddenly change? Lyra and Kalen exchanged a brief glance before Kalen answered. Because we are losing a war we do not know how to win, and old records suggested your ancestors once fought this same enemy and survived. We came hoping that history might repeat itself, though we honestly expected to find nothing but empty ruins. Grace felt a chill move through her despite the warm afternoon air. What enemy? They call themselves nothing, Kalen said. Ancient records name them the Scarrow Swarm. Perhaps that name means something to you as well, given how it appears in the same old accounts that led us here. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Every child raised in Haven City knew fragments of the old stories. Dark warnings passed down through generations about the terrible war that had once nearly destroyed humanity, long before the collapse forced their ancestors into hiding. The details had blurred over centuries of retelling, but the name Scarrow had survived intact in the oldest surviving texts, spoken of with a fear that had never fully faded from human memory, even after 200 years of silence. That name is not unfamiliar to us, Daniel said quietly. Our ancestors fought them too, a very long time ago. Something shifted in Kalen's expression, a mixture of relief and renewed urgency. Then perhaps we came to the right place after all. The meeting that followed lasted well into the evening, moving eventually from the surface clearing down into Haven City itself, though Nathan insisted on strict limitations regarding what the visitors were permitted to see. Kalen and Lyra were led through carefully selected corridors, shown only enough of the hidden city to demonstrate that humanity had indeed survived and rebuilt, without revealing the full scope of Haven City's true size and strength. Lyra could barely contain her fascination as she walked through corridors carved from solid rock centuries earlier, marveling at a civilization that had managed to sustain itself completely hidden from the rest of the galaxy for 200 years. This is remarkable, she said. Our historical accounts described your species as destroyed. Instead, you built an entire world beneath the surface of your own planet and simply waited. We did what we had to do to survive, Nathan said, joining the group as they reached the council chamber. After the war that nearly ended us, our ancestors made a choice. Rather than risk exposure to a galaxy that had already proven dangerous, they chose to disappear completely. We have honored that choice ever since. Kalen studied Nathan carefully, and now that choice is being tested again, because the very enemy that forced you into hiding has returned, threatening the same galaxy that once believed you extinct. The room fell silent for a long moment. You are asking us to abandon 200 years of careful isolation, Nathan said finally, to help civilizations that never even knew we existed, against an enemy that nearly destroyed us the first time we faced it. I am not asking you to forget the risk, Kalen replied honestly. I am telling you that if the Scarrow are not stopped, they will eventually reach every corner of known space, including systems close enough to threaten your own quarantine, whether you choose to help us or not. Hiding worked when the danger stayed far away. It may not work much longer, if that danger continues expanding unchecked. Grace spoke up then, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years studying humanity's fragmented, incomplete historical records. He is right. Our ancestors' records describe the Scarrow as relentless, expanding constantly, consuming everything they encounter. If that pattern remains unchanged after 200 years, distance alone will not protect us indefinitely. Nathan closed his eyes briefly, the weight of the decision clearly heavy on him. 200 years of tradition, of careful discipline built entirely around staying hidden, now faced its greatest challenge, not from an enemy attacking Earth directly, but from the simple, unavoidable truth that isolation might no longer guarantee the safety it once promised. I cannot make this decision alone, Nathan said finally. This affects every hidden city, not just Haven City. I will need to consult the full Council of Settlements before any commitment can be made. Kalen nodded, understanding the weight of what he was asking. How long will that take? Longer than you likely have, Nathan admitted, but it must be done properly. Rushing a decision this significant would betray everything our ancestors built. Lyra, who had remained quiet through much of the tense exchange, finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. While your council deliberates, may I ask something of my own? Our historical records of your species are fragmented, filled with gaps and contradictions collected over centuries of second-hand accounts. Would you be willing to help us understand more clearly what truly happened during your ancestors' war against the Scarrow? Any detail, however small, could help us prepare our own defenses regardless of what your council ultimately decides. Nathan considered this request carefully before nodding. That, at least, I can agree to immediately. Grace, would you be willing to work with our guests on this? Grace glanced at Daniel briefly before nodding. Of course. Over the following days, as Nathan traveled between hidden settlements gathering input from human leaders who had spent their entire lives believing contact with the outside galaxy would only ever mean danger, Grace worked closely with Lyra, sharing fragments of preserved human history, old military records, and surviving technical documents describing tactics and technology developed during the original war against the Scarrow. Daniel found himself spending considerable time with Kaelin as well, the two of them developing an unexpected mutual respect, despite the enormous differences between their species. Kaelin shared detailed accounts of the current Scarrow advance, describing colonies lost, fleets destroyed, and an alliance struggling desperately to find any effective strategy against an enemy that seemed to adapt faster than the compact could respond. Your species fought them once and survived, Kaelin said one evening, studying old human weapon schematics Grace had shared. Yet you speak of that war as something that nearly destroyed you completely. It did, Daniel confirmed. The victory our ancestors achieved came at devastating cost. Entire populations were lost. Whole cities disappeared. Whatever technology or tactics helped us survive back then, none of it came without tremendous sacrifice. And yet you are willing to consider fighting again, Kaelin observed. Daniel was quiet for a moment before answering honestly. I do not know if we are willing yet. That decision still belongs to people wiser and more experienced than me. But I understand why the question needs to be asked, even if the answer terrifies everyone involved. 9 days after Kaelin and Lyra first landed on Earth, Nathan returned to Haven City, carrying the combined decision of every hidden human settlement across the planet. The council chamber was filled with representatives from settlements Daniel had only ever heard about in passing, leaders who had traveled great distances through carefully hidden tunnels and transport routes to be present for this historic gathering. Nathan stood before the assembled council, along with Kaelin, Lyra, Daniel, and Grace, and delivered the decision that would reshape humanity's relationship with the galaxy for the first time in 200 years. After extensive deliberation, Nathan said, the combined settlements of Earth have reached a decision. We will not abandon our discipline of secrecy blindly, nor will we commit our people to a war without careful preparation. However, we recognize the truth in what our visitors have told us. Isolation was never meant to be permanent protection against a threat that continues to grow unchecked. He paused, looking directly at Kaelin and Lyra. We will help you, Nathan continued. Not because we owe your alliance anything, and not because we have forgotten why our ancestors chose to disappear in the first place. We will help because the enemy that once nearly destroyed us threatens to do the same to countless others now, and because 200 years of hiding have taught us that survival sometimes requires stepping back into a light we spent generations avoiding. Kaelin bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep respect and gratitude. On behalf of the Veldran Compact, I thank you. I will not pretend this decision comes without risk to your people. But I promise you, whatever assistance you provide will not be forgotten or taken lightly. As the council chamber erupted into quiet, tense conversation among the assembled human leaders, Grace turned to Daniel, her expression a complex mixture of fear and determination. 200 years of silence, she said quietly, and it ends because a galaxy that forgot we existed suddenly needs us to remember how to fight. Daniel nodded slowly, watching Kaelin and Lyra among the human leaders, who had just agreed to risk everything their ancestors built. Then I suppose it is time we remembered. Outside, far above the hidden tunnels of Haven City, the sky remained calm and quiet, giving no indication of the storm gathering in the distant reaches of the galaxy. But within those ancient stone corridors, humanity had just taken its first step back into a universe that had long ago written them off as nothing more than a cautionary legend. That legend was about to prove itself very much alive. Preparing humanity for war took far less time than anyone expected, and that alone told Kaelin everything he needed to know about the species the galaxy had spent 2 centuries dismissing as extinct. Within weeks of the Council's decision, Haven City and the other hidden settlements revealed a level of readiness that stunned every compact representative who witnessed it. Deep beneath the surface, humanity had spent 200 years doing far more than simply hiding. They had continued developing technology, refining old weapon designs, training new generations in combat discipline passed down since the original war against the Scarrow, all while maintaining perfect secrecy from a galaxy that never suspected any of it existed. This is not the technology of a species that has been idle for 2 centuries, Kalen admitted, standing beside Daniel in one of Haven City's massive underground shipyards, watching as engineers made final adjustments to vessels unlike anything the compact currently possessed. Why prepare so extensively for a war you hoped would never come? Because our ancestors learned the hard way that hope alone does not guarantee safety, Daniel replied. They built this readiness not because they expected to need it, but because they refused to be caught unprepared a second time. The human fleet that eventually departed Earth was smaller than the massive compact armadas, but every vessel carried weapons and defensive systems specifically designed generations earlier, with the Scarrow swarm in mind. Grace worked closely with compact engineers to integrate human technology with existing compact systems, creating hybrid defensive strategies that neither side could have developed alone. Daniel was given command of one of the newer human vessels, a role he accepted with a mixture of pride and quiet terror. Standing on the bridge as Earth shrank behind them for the first time in 200 years, he found himself thinking of every story he had heard growing up about the ancestors who once fought this exact enemy and paid an unimaginable price for their survival. Nervous? Grace asked, standing beside him as the fleet formed up alongside compact reinforcements near the edge of the solar system. More than I have ever been in my life, Daniel admitted, but also strangely certain this is exactly what we are meant to be doing. The combined fleet's first major engagement came 3 weeks later, at a border colony called Rennick Station, one of the last remaining compact outposts, standing between the advancing Scarrow swarm and the heavily populated core worlds of the compact. Intelligence gathered by compact scouts suggested the swarm intended to strike Rennick Station within days, making it either a critical defensive victory or another devastating loss, depending entirely on how well the combined human and compact forces could coordinate under pressure. Kalen commanded the overall engagement from his flagship, with Daniel's vessel positioned among the forward defensive line, alongside several compact warships. Lyra remained aboard Kalen's ship, continuing to study every piece of data gathered from the encounter, hoping to identify patterns that might reveal weaknesses in the Scarrow's seemingly unstoppable advance. The swarm arrived exactly as intelligence predicted, appearing at the edge of the system in numbers that made even experienced compact officers visibly tense. Hundreds of jagged biological vessels moved through space in a formation that defied conventional military logic, yet carried with it a terrifying, coordinated precision that had shattered every previous compact defense. All ships, hold formation, Kalen ordered over the combined communication channel. Human vessels, begin deployment of defensive countermeasures on my signal. Daniel gripped the edge of his command console, watching the approaching swarm on his display, his mind racing through everything Haven City's old records had taught him about this enemy. Unlike compact forces, who had only recently encountered the Scarrow for the first time in living memory, human tactical doctrine had been shaped generations earlier, specifically around understanding this exact threat, refined through decades of careful study following the original war. They will attempt to overwhelm our formation through numbers and speed, Daniel said over the human fleet's private channel. Do not try to match their maneuverability directly. Focus fire on their smaller support vessels first. Break apart their coordination before engaging the larger clusters. As the Scarrow fleet closed the distance, Daniel gave the order, and for the first time in 200 years, human warships opened fire in direct combat against the enemy that had once nearly ended their species entirely. The battle that followed was unlike anything Kalen had witnessed throughout the entire war so far. Where previous compact engagements against the Scarrow had quickly dissolved into chaotic, desperate retreats, the combined fleet maintained disciplined coordination, even as Scarrow vessels attempted their usual overwhelming assault. Human ships targeted smaller support vessels with precise, calculated strikes, disrupting the swarm's usual coordinated movement patterns, in ways compact forces alone had never managed to achieve. Their formation is breaking apart, Lyra reported from aboard Kalen's flagship, watching sensor data update in real time. The human tactics are working. The swarm does not know how to respond to this kind of coordinated resistance. Daniel's vessel took heavy damage during the engagement, forced to weave through incoming waves of smaller scaro organisms, attempting to breach the hull, but the ship held together, its defensive systems performing exactly as generations of careful preparation intended. Around him, other human vessels fought with similar disciplined intensity, drawing on tactical knowledge preserved specifically for this moment, across 2 centuries of quiet, patient readiness. The battle raged for nearly 3 hours before the Scaro forces, having suffered losses far heavier than any previous engagement against the compact alone, finally began to withdraw, retreating back toward the unexplored darkness they had emerged from. As the remaining Scaro vessels disappeared from sensor range, a stunned silence fell over the combined fleet's communication channels. For the first time since the war began, the compact and its new human allies had not merely survived an engagement against the swarm, they had won. Cheers erupted across various communication channels as crews began processing what had just happened. But Daniel remained focused, watching the empty space where the enemy fleet had retreated, aware that a single victory, however significant, did not mean the war itself was over. Kalen's voice came through the main channel moments later, carrying a mixture of exhaustion and genuine hope. Rennick Station is secure. All forces, stand down from combat readiness and prepare for damage assessment. Aboard his damaged but functional vessel, Daniel finally allowed himself a moment of relief, though he knew it would be brief. Grace, monitoring tactical data from her station nearby, turned to him with an expression of cautious optimism. "We did it," she said. "For the first time since this war started, they retreated instead of us." "This time," Daniel replied carefully, "one battle does not win a war, Grace, but it proves something important. It proves the old stories were true. Our ancestors really did find a way to fight this enemy successfully, and that knowledge still means something even after 200 years. News of the victory at Rennick Station spread rapidly throughout compact space, providing a desperately needed boost to morale after weeks of continuous losses and mounting fear. For the first time since the Scaro's return, ordinary citizens across a dozen worlds began hearing whispered reports of a mysterious ally who had appeared seemingly from nowhere, turning the tide of a battle everyone expected to end in another devastating defeat. Not everyone within the compact welcomed this news with unqualified enthusiasm, however. Oren Feld, still deeply skeptical of relying on a species long dismissed as mythological, raised concerns during an emergency council session held shortly after reports of the Rennick Station victory reached Veldris Prime. One successful engagement does not erase centuries of caution regarding this species, Oren argued before the assembled council. We know very little about their true capabilities, their true intentions, or what they might eventually expect in return for their assistance. Lyra, who had returned briefly to Veldris Prime to present her findings directly to the council, responded firmly. What we know is that without their assistance, Rennick Station would have fallen exactly as every other border colony has fallen before it. Whatever uncertainty remains about their long-term intentions, their immediate contribution has already saved countless lives that would otherwise have been lost. The council debate continued for hours, reflecting the genuine tension within compact leadership between desperate necessity and long-ingrained caution. Ultimately, with Scaro forces continuing their advance toward other border systems despite the setback at Rennick Station, practical urgency won out over lingering hesitation. The Council formally approved continued cooperation with human forces, expanding the alliance to include coordinated defense of several additional threatened systems. Over the following weeks, the combined human and compact fleet fought a series of increasingly difficult engagements across multiple border systems, gradually developing more sophisticated joint tactics as both sides learned to better understand each other's strengths and limitations. Daniel found himself growing into his role as fleet commander with each passing battle, drawing not only on generations of preserved human tactical knowledge, but also on hard-won experience gained through direct combat against an enemy unlike anything either species had fully understood before this alliance formed. Losses continued to mount on both sides, however, a painful reminder that even significant victories came at real cost. During a particularly brutal engagement near a system called Halvern's Edge, Daniel watched 3 human vessels destroyed within minutes, their crews lost entirely, a devastating reminder of exactly why humanity's ancestors had chosen isolation over continued exposure to this same terrible enemy 2 centuries earlier. That evening, following the difficult victory at Halvern's Edge, Daniel found Grace alone in one of the ship's quiet observation areas, staring out at the stars with an expression he had rarely seen on her before, something close to grief, mixed with quiet determination. "We lost good people today," Grace said softly as he approached. "We did," Daniel agreed, standing beside her. "More than I want to think about right now." "Do you ever wonder," Grace continued, "if our ancestors made the wrong choice generations ago? If instead of hiding, they had simply continued fighting alongside whatever allies they had at the time, whether things might have turned out differently?" Daniel considered the question carefully before answering. "I think our ancestors made the only choice they believed would guarantee humanity's survival at that moment. Maybe it was the right choice for that time, but I do not think it has to remain the right choice forever. Perhaps this is simply what comes next, the next chapter our ancestors could not have written themselves." Grace nodded slowly, though her expression remained troubled. "I hope you are right. I hope whatever comes next justifies everything we are losing to get there." Word soon reached the fleet that Scarrow forces were regrouping for what Compact Intelligence believed would be their largest offensive yet, a massive coordinated assault aimed directly at Veldris Prime itself, the political and military heart of the entire Compact Alliance. If Veldris Prime fell, Compact leadership warned, the psychological and strategic damage might prove impossible to recover from, potentially ending any realistic hope of ultimately defeating the swarm at all. Kalen called an emergency strategy session aboard his flagship, bringing together senior Compact officers alongside Daniel and Grace to plan the defense of Veldris Prime. Lyra, having returned once more to active fleet duty rather than remain safely at the capital, presented updated analysis of Scarrow attack patterns gathered across every engagement since the war began. "Based on everything we have observed," Lyra explained, addressing the assembled officers, "the swarm consistently targets the most heavily defended positions first, attempting to overwhelm strong defenses quickly before moving to consume undefended resources at their leisure. If they are indeed planning an assault on Veldris Prime, they will likely commit the vast majority of their remaining forces to this single engagement. Which means if we can successfully defend the capital," Kalen added, "we may inflict damage severe enough to fundamentally cripple their ability to continue this war effectively." Daniel studied the tactical projections displayed before the assembled officers, recognizing both the tremendous opportunity and the terrible risk contained within this coming battle. If we succeed, this could effectively end the war. If we fail, however, we may lose everything, both our forces and any remaining hope of stopping them afterward. "Then we cannot afford to fail," Grace said firmly. As preparations began for what everyone understood would be the most significant battle of the entire war, Daniel found himself reflecting once more on everything that had led humanity to this moment, 200 years of careful hidden preparation, culminating in a single decisive confrontation that would determine not only humanity's future relationship with the wider galaxy, but potentially the survival of that galaxy itself. The fleet moved into position around Veldris Prime 3 days later, human and compact vessels arranged together in a coordinated defensive formation developed through weeks of hard-won combat experience. As the massive Scarrow armada finally appeared at the edge of the system, larger and more overwhelming than any force previously encountered throughout the entire war, Daniel took a deep breath, steadying himself for what he knew would be the defining battle of his lifetime. "All forces," Kalen's voice announced across the combined fleet channel, carrying the weight of everything riding on the coming engagement. "Hold position and prepare for the fight that decides everything." Daniel gripped his command console tightly, watching the enormous enemy formation approach, thinking of Haven City far away, of Nathan, and every leader who had trusted humanity's fate to this alliance, of 200 years of silent preparation finally reaching its ultimate test. "For Earth," he said quietly to himself, "and for every world this enemy still threatens." Then the battle for Veldris Prime began. The sky above Veldris Prime turned dark with enemy vessels within minutes, an overwhelming mass of jagged Scarrow ships pouring into the system in numbers that dwarfed every previous engagement of the war combined. Daniel watched his tactical display fill with hostile contacts, the sheer scale of the approaching force testing every ounce of discipline he had developed over the preceding weeks of continuous combat. "Steady," he told his crew, though his own hands remained tense against the command console. "We trained for exactly this. Hold formation until my signal." Across the combined fleet, similar words echoed through countless command channels as human and compact officers alike prepared their crews for the most decisive engagement of the entire war. Kalen's flagship anchored the center of the formation, with Daniel's vessel positioned along the forward defensive line where human tactical expertise against the Scarrow could be most effectively utilized. Lyra remained aboard Kalen's ship, continuously analyzing incoming sensor data, searching desperately for any weakness in the enemy's massive formation that might provide the combined fleet with a critical advantage. "Their formation appears denser at the outer edges," she reported, possibly concentrating their strongest vessels to shield something at the center of their approach. "A command vessel, perhaps," Kalen suggested, studying the same data. "If the Scarrow truly operate with some form of centralized coordination, disrupting that center could fracture their entire assault." Daniel considered this information carefully. Old human records from the original war against the Scarrow had mentioned something similar, references to a central coordinating presence within Scarrow fleets that, when eliminated, occasionally caused surrounding forces to lose cohesion entirely. It was a detail his ancestors had documented but never fully confirmed, buried within fragmented accounts that had survived 2 centuries of careful preservation. "If our old records are accurate," Daniel said over the combined channel, "destroying whatever lies at the center of their formation could be the key to breaking this entire assault. It will not be easy. That position will almost certainly be the most heavily defended point in their entire fleet." Kalen weighed the risk carefully. Sending a strike force directly toward the most protected section of an overwhelming enemy formation was an enormous gamble, one that could easily result in devastating losses if the theory proved wrong. But with Veldris Prime's survival hanging in the balance, and no better strategy immediately available, he made his decision. "Daniel, can your vessel lead a strike force toward that position?" Daniel felt the weight of the question settle over him, aware of exactly what he was being asked to risk. "We can try." As the Scarrow fleet closed the remaining distance, the combined human and compact forces engaged in a battle unlike anything either side had previously experienced. Wave after wave of smaller Scarrow vessels crashed against the defensive formation, testing every weakness in the combined fleet's coordination, while Daniel gathered a small strike force of both human and compact vessels, preparing for the desperate attempt to pierce through toward the heavily shielded center of the enemy formation. "Strike force, on my mark," Daniel announced, watching his tactical display carefully as the outer Scarrow formation began to show gaps created by the intense fighting along the defensive perimeter. "We move fast, we move together, and we do not stop until we reach that center point." The strike force broke away from the main defensive line, weaving through chaotic combat as smaller Scarrow vessels attempted to intercept their approach. Daniel's ship took heavy damage almost immediately, warning indicators flashing across every console as defensive systems strained to keep pace with the intensity of the assault. Beside him, Grace worked frantically to maintain critical ship functions, her expertise proving essential as the vessel pushed deeper into increasingly hostile territory. "We are losing shield integrity," Grace warned, watching power levels drop steadily. "We cannot sustain this much longer." "We do not need much longer," Daniel replied, watching their position relative to the dense cluster of Scarrow vessels ahead. "We are almost there." The strike force pressed forward through increasingly desperate resistance, losing 2 vessels along the way, their crews sacrificed in the effort to reach the heart of the enemy formation. Finally, as Daniel's badly damaged ship broke through the final layer of defensive Scarrow vessels, something came into view that confirmed everything the old human records had suggested. At the center of the massive formation floated an enormous vessel, unlike anything else in the Scarrow fleet, its surface pulsing with strange organic light, clearly serving as some form of central coordination point for the surrounding forces. "That is it," Daniel said, adrenaline surging through him despite his exhaustion. "All remaining strike force vessels, concentrate everything we have on that target." The remaining ships of Daniel's strike force opened fire simultaneously, their combined weapons systems tearing into the massive central vessel's defenses. The enemy ship's outer shielding held for several tense moments before finally beginning to fracture under the sustained assault, strange energy discharges rippling across its surface as internal systems began failing. Then, with a final coordinated strike from every remaining vessel in Daniel's strike force, the central Scarrow vessel erupted in a massive burst of light, breaking apart entirely. The effect on the surrounding enemy formation was immediate and dramatic. Across the entire battlefield, Scarrow vessels that had been fighting with terrifying coordinated precision suddenly began moving erratically, their unified strategy collapsing into confused, disconnected individual actions. What had been an overwhelming, coordinated assault fractured almost instantly into a chaotic, disorganized retreat. "Their formation is completely breaking apart," Lyra reported excitedly from aboard Kalen's flagship, watching the dramatic shift in enemy behavior with stunned amazement. The theory was correct. Without that central coordination, they cannot maintain any effective offensive strategy. "All forces," Kalen announced across the combined fleet channel, his voice carrying renewed hope after weeks of desperate, costly fighting. "Press the advantage. Do not let them regroup." The combined human and compact fleet surged forward, taking full advantage of the enemy's sudden disorganization, driving the remaining Scarrow forces into a full retreat that continued until the last enemy vessel finally disappeared from sensor range, fleeing back toward the distant darkness they had emerged from months earlier. Silence fell across the battlefield as the combined fleet slowly began assessing the aftermath of the largest engagement of the entire war. Daniel's badly damaged vessel drifted amid the wreckage of the shattered Scarrow formation, barely holding together after the intense final push toward the enemy's central command vessel. "Daniel," Grace said quietly, her voice filled with exhausted relief, "we did it. Veldris Prime is secure." Daniel allowed himself a long, shaky breath, watching the retreating remnants of the Scarrow fleet disappear from his tactical display. "We did," he agreed. "But we lost people to make it happen. A lot of people." Grace nodded solemnly, the weight of their victory tempered by genuine grief for everyone lost throughout the difficult campaign. "We will honor them. But first, we need to make sure this victory actually means something lasting." Over the following weeks, as the combined fleet worked to confirm the full extent of the Scarrow retreat, compact intelligence gradually pieced together the true significance of what had happened at Veldris Prime. The destruction of the central coordinating vessel had done far more than simply break apart a single battle formation. Without that central coordination, the wider Scarrow swarm's ability to launch large-scale, organized offensives appeared to have been critically damaged, forcing the remaining scattered forces back into the deep, unexplored darkness they had originally emerged from, seemingly unable to reorganize an effective threat on the same scale as before. The war was not entirely over. Minor Scarrow remnants continued to pose localized threats along certain border regions for months afterward, but the massive existential danger that had threatened to overwhelm the entire Compact Alliance had been decisively broken. Veldris Prime, along with countless other worlds throughout compact space, had been saved, and that salvation had come directly through the unexpected alliance between a galaxy that had long dismissed humanity as extinct mythology, and a species that had spent 2 centuries quietly preparing for exactly this moment. News of the victory spread rapidly throughout every corner of compact space, and with it spread the true story of humanity's role in achieving that victory. The old myths describing humans as a doomed, self-destructive species were replaced almost overnight by a very different narrative, one describing a civilization that had endured devastating loss, chosen careful discipline over reckless exposure, and ultimately emerged at exactly the right moment to help save an entire galaxy from a threat it could not have defeated alone. Back on Veldris Prime, as formal ceremonies were organized to honor those who had fought and died throughout the war, Kalen requested a private meeting with Nathan Cole, who had traveled from Earth specifically to witness the historic moment firsthand alongside Daniel and Grace. "The Compact Council has reached a decision," Kalen explained, standing before Nathan in one of Veldris Prime's grand meeting halls. In recognition of humanity's contribution to this war, and in acknowledgement of the terrible mistake our historical records made in dismissing your species as extinct, the Council formally offers Earth full recognition as an independent civilization within the Compact Alliance, along with all diplomatic and protective privileges that recognition provides. Nathan considered this offer carefully, aware of everything it represented, the end of 200 years of careful, deliberate isolation, replaced by a very different future, defined by open engagement with a galaxy that had only recently rediscovered humanity's existence. "This is a significant offer," Nathan said finally, "and I do not make this decision lightly, given everything our ancestors sacrificed to protect the discipline of hiding. But I believe circumstances have fundamentally changed. The galaxy that forced our ancestors into isolation is not the same galaxy that exists today. Perhaps it is time humanity stepped forward into that new reality, not from a position of vulnerability as before, but from a position of proven strength and hard-won respect." Kalen bowed his head slightly, genuine warmth evident in his expression, despite the physical differences between their species. "On behalf of the entire Compact Alliance, I welcome that decision." As formal negotiations began regarding humanity's new role within galactic affairs, Daniel found himself standing alone on an observation platform overlooking Veldris Prime's sprawling capital city, watching alien ships move gracefully between towering structures unlike anything he had ever imagined during his childhood spent entirely within the hidden tunnels of Haven City. Grace joined him there, standing quietly beside him for a long moment before speaking. "It is strange, is it not? Just months ago, we were preparing defenses in case anyone ever discovered Earth existed. Now here we are, standing in the capital of the very alliance that once believed we were nothing more than an old cautionary story." Daniel nodded slowly, watching the busy alien city stretch out before him. "I keep thinking about everyone who never got to see this moment. Every generation that lived and died believing hiding was the only path to survival, never imagining humanity might one day stand openly among the stars again. They gave us the chance to reach this moment," Grace said gently. "Every sacrifice, every generation of careful discipline, all of it led here." Daniel turned to look at her, feeling the weight of everything they had experienced together over the preceding months settle into something resembling quiet peace, for the first time since the alarms first sounded in Haven City. "Do you think this is truly the beginning of something lasting? Or simply a brief moment before the next crisis forces us back into hiding again?" Grace considered the question seriously before answering. "I think the future is never guaranteed, no matter how carefully we prepare for it. But I also think our ancestors would be proud of the choice we made, stepping forward instead of remaining hidden, even knowing the risks involved. Whatever comes next, we will face it as ourselves, openly, rather than as a forgotten legend hiding in the shadows." Weeks later, a formal ceremony was held at Veldris Prime, attended by representatives from every major civilization within the Compact Alliance, along with a delegation from Earth led by Nathan Cole. Before the assembled crowd, the full story of humanity's ancient war against the Scarrow, their subsequent 2 centuries of hidden survival, and their decisive contribution to the recent conflict, was formally recorded into compact historical archives, replacing the old dismissive mythology with an accurate account of genuine sacrifice, discipline, and hard-won courage. Lyra, standing near the front of the assembled crowd, watched the ceremony with quiet satisfaction, having played a crucial role in uncovering the historical truth that ultimately led to this moment. Kalen stood beside her, his expression reflecting genuine respect for allies who had proven, beyond any doubt, that the old myths surrounding their extinction had been entirely wrong. As the ceremony concluded, Nathan addressed the assembled crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the grand hall, filled with representatives from countless different worlds. "For 200 years, Nathan said, our species existed as nothing more than a rumor, a cautionary legend told to remind civilizations of the dangers of unchecked ambition. We accepted that mythology because it protected us during a time when exposure meant almost certain destruction. But legends, however useful they may be, are not truth. The truth is that humanity never disappeared. We simply waited, quietly, patiently, for the right moment to step forward again. He paused, looking out over the assembled crowd, representing dozens of different worlds and civilizations. That moment has now arrived, Nathan continued, not because we sought recognition or glory, but because a galaxy in genuine need called upon knowledge and strength, our ancestors preserved, specifically for exactly this kind of crisis. We answered that call, and in doing so, we proved that the legend the galaxy once told about our extinction was never anything more than an incomplete story, waiting for its true ending to finally be written. As applause echoed through the grand hall, Daniel stood among the human delegation, watching representatives from civilizations his ancestors had never even known existed rise to honor humanity's return to galactic affairs. He thought of Haven City, far below Earth's surface, of every hidden settlement that had maintained careful discipline for 2 centuries, of every sacrifice made throughout the recent devastating war, and of the uncertain but hopeful future now opening before an entire species that had spent generations believing such a future might never come. Grace stood beside him, her hand finding his amid the celebration surrounding them, and together they watched as humanity, once dismissed as nothing more than a forgotten legend, finally took its rightful place among the stars once more, no longer hiding in silence, but standing openly, as a civilization the galaxy would never again underestimate. The monsters that had once forced humanity into hiding had returned, and in facing them once more, humanity had proven, beyond any remaining doubt, exactly why the old legend had always been far more than mere myth. It had been, all along, simply a story waiting patiently for its true chapter to finally be told.